This week on the DTD podcast, we have Lieutenant Colonel Chaveso Chevy Cook. He's a 17-and-a-half-year veteran with the U.S. Army. He attended the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, worked in air defense artillery and PSYOPs, and just successfully defended his doctoral dissertation. So let's get right into it.
Are you not entertained? Is this not why you are here?
How about no, you crazy Dutch bastard? What we've got here is failure to communicate.
60% of the time, it works every time.
That doesn't make sense.
Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it. I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.
That's cute. I remember when I had my first beer.
Why so serious?
I am serious, and don't call me Shirley.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the DTD podcast. We have an interesting one tonight. We're going to talk about the military, but mostly we're going to talk about character, personal development, and kind of pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps. So welcome in Chevy Cook. Chevy, how are you?
I'm good, DJ. Thanks for having me on tonight, man.
Absolutely. Your story is really interesting to me. You started out kind of rough in life, and you have really kind of forged a path and kind of made your name known out there. And I want to start with that. Now, I usually don't like to start with kind of downer things, but I think it's going to kind of set the story for everything. I want to talk about your biological parents, and then I really want to focus in on Mama J. So let's talk about your young childhood going into Mama J, and then kind of how she took you on from there.
Yeah, so I'm a child of the 80s. My parents met on the disco dance floor in the 70s, actually. They were, they danced. They worked at a local pizza place, got to really know each other, got to really like each other. And it's a little bit taboo for their relationship with regard to some other historical stuff in our family. But, my mom's white and he was black, and they just kind of didn't like that. So some initial friction. They get together, but then the disco dance just doesn't play all the way out. So they get divorced. My dad decides to take myself and my younger brother at a very young age, take him on by himself. And then he ran into some trouble with the law. And the majority of his sisters and brothers wanted to take just one of us, wanted to take myself or my brother. No one wanted to take us together. But then eventually his oldest sister did decide to take us both. So we leave Florida, come up to South Carolina, had never visited, had never, lived there or anything. Now we're living in South Carolina, and this aunt has other kids, and those kids are teenagers, and those kids are doing various things in the neighborhood that, just aren't probably the best for us youngins to be around. And our next door neighbor, at the time, we knew her as Miss Sunkissed. And Miss Sunkissed had the mailbox that was our kind of finish line for races on bikes or foot races or any, it's just, we went to her mailbox, and that was the finish line for Sean and I. But we also went to her house for other things. We were the cute little kids, going next door to Miss Sunkissed's house to borrow bread or borrow milk or borrow some eggs or what have you. Now, Sunkissed didn't have any kids. She had a boyfriend at the time, but wasn't married or anything like that. Well, eventually, Sunkissed took a real liking to us, and she just, wanted to bring us around more and more and more. And eventually, the situation with my aunt got really untenable. They were doing some things, the kids were, that we were getting involved in that, wasn't the best look back in the 80s. And there's maybe some nefarious and criminal behavior that are happening too. And Mama J was like, well, Miss Sunkiss at the time was like, maybe I want to, take these kids out of this situation. So, lo and behold, this is creeping up on my 9th birthday, and she asked me if I had ever had a birthday party. I said I had not. So she said, come on up, we're going to give you a birthday party. And I go up there to have a birthday party, and the lights are all out in the house. And she asked, hey, do you know what you're supposed to do when we blow out the candles on this cake? I was like, no, I don't know what to do. And she said, you're supposed to make a wish. So as God is my witness, I wish that I could move in with her. And somebody hurt me because we eventually moved in with her. And then she eventually, Miss Sunkiss, became Mama J. She became our adoptive mother. And that pretty much put me on the path that I've been on since. And Mama J today, my next door neighbor, is my mom. And we could talk about, some of the roadblocks there, stumbles there, or, circling back around with the rest of my family or any of that stuff. But yeah, my next door neighbor is who I'll call my mama today.
Well, here's my question though. Without Mama J coming into your life, where are you at today?
A statistic. I firmly believe that. I grew up in a neighborhood like, people hear about like Detroit and LA and these kind of big cities that things are happening, especially in the 80s. But I really do think if you look across American culture, especially in the 80s, if you could be in any kind of suburban or city kind of area that has a ghetto or a hood or whatever in it that just isn't the best context or best environment to grow up in. And there's things happening that aren't the best for any of our kids. And that stuff still happens today, but by and large, I think it was a little bit worse a couple of years ago. All of us, as we get older, we kind of think, it was always a little bit worse. But, I was in a neighborhood, I'll be frank and honest. Like I was in a neighborhood where like we were taught to not trust police or any authority figures. I knew it wasn't a news helicopter flying overhead. I know it was a police helicopter. I was my older cousins helped me identify undercover cops that were driving through the neighborhood. And, that was kind of the stuff that was going on there. First time I saw a dead body was overseas on a deployment. It was actually in my yard after a shootout. I remember distinctly Mama J telling us to duck in the house because there was a path from one street to another street. It went through our yard, and these guys were shooting at each other, and it didn't work out for one of them. So I firmly believe if Mama J didn't intervene, if I'd have just kind of stayed with what was going on, the kind of normal trend in that neighborhood, I'd either be in jail, or I'd, not be around living, or I definitely probably wouldn't be serving my country and have a great family of my own and have taken care of all these opportunities. I firmly believe that she's an angel. She's partly why I'm religious, man. I believe she's on borrowed time. She clipped her wings to come down here and do stuff like this for us.
Well, I think it's interesting with you having a background in psychology and carrying it as far as you have in psychology, even in your military actions. I think it's funny to look at, maybe funny is not the word to say, but I find it interesting that if she doesn't intervene, you're the same guy. We can agree on that, right? Biologically, you're the same.
Yeah, sure.
Everything. If she doesn't intervene, you're not a lieutenant colonel in the military. You don't do everything you've done, but you're the same person. So what is it about Mama J that changed the inside of you? Because as we know, you and I have talked before this, trouble still kind of lurked around you every once in a while, but it wasn't an affront like it was in the beginning to you. So what was it about Mama J that changed almost the inner you?
Yeah. So, and we can get into this real deep, as far as like some of the theory behind, individual in context with regard to relational developmental systems and how people develop over time. Just finishing my doctorate in human development, we can really get into the weeds. But
well, I would like to definitely touch on nature versus nurture and all that kind of
oh
stuff.
yeah,
So.
oh yeah, we can surely beat that up. But this is what I think about Mama J. Mama J created an environment within an environment. Okay. So if you go to my house right now, and I don't want to put her address out there because I don't think that's the right thing to do. But if you were to go, she lives in the same context. She lives in that same neighborhood. We grew up in that same neighborhood, right? And if you go to my house, there are bars on our windows. There are 5 locks on my front door. There are 3 on the back. My mom still puts the bar under the door to wedge it from being kicked in, from just stuff that happened in our youth, right? And as much as that seems like it would be a prison, it was not. It was this incubator. It was this safe haven. It kept everything out as opposed to keeping us in. And I think what makes her special is she got us away from all of that. She did little things. My mom is not college educated. She's not some lawyer or something out here. My mama, has worked a regular 9 to 5, putting chips on data boards for computers since the 80s. Okay. And in between there was also a janitor in a hospital wiping up all the stuff that you wipe up in the emergency room and stuff at night, right? She knew that we needed love, care, affection, and a stable environment within that home. And what she did was get us out of that neighborhood as much as possible and limited our interactions in the neighborhood when we were there. So for one, I went 2 hours across Columbia. I rode the bus 5 o'clock in the morning to go to a different middle school and high school across town that was a better high school. She made sure that happened. We played sports on our school teams, but we also played like sports across town in the parks and stuff. So she constantly got us out of the neighborhood into different contexts so we could not be caught up in the distractions within my neighborhood. She let me hang out and do all the stuff that kids do, come home when the street lights come on and all that stuff. We rode bikes and ran around in the woods and all that stuff. But she was very specific about who we were hanging out with and who we were being influenced by. And she just pushed and prodded and poked just enough to say, hey, you need to go do something else. And she had a rule. We were getting out of the house at 18. We were going to school. It wasn't an option and it had to be free. And she made no bones about, like, you got to get your life together. You got to get out of here. And the only way you're going to get out of here is through education. And she did not relent. She was relentless. So she took whatever genetic material I had that wasn't even hers. We are no blood relation. She saw something, some possibility, and then she just fostered an internal environment within our home that was like, hey, go chase the American dream, go chase success. And to this day, she doesn't even claim that it was her doing. I talked to her at my promotion a couple of weeks ago. We're crying on the phone and stuff because we've come a long way. And she still to this day is like, I didn't really do anything, because she's a humble, wise Southern woman.
First time you felt loved?
Wow, that's powerful. I think I was loved by my birth parents. I have some good young memories of them for sure. But then there's all this like brokenness in the middle for a couple years. And then Mama J obviously kind of comes back around, wraps that back together. And made me feel whole first, I think. Anyone who comes to know Mama J, she's a tough nut to crack. She's like tough love up front and then a softie on the back end. And it took me a while to figure out what that was, because I didn't really have that from my birth parents when I was really little. And then I had nothing for a while. I think she made me feel whole. at first, and then I figured out what that kind of love was. And then the next person I fell in love with was actually my wife in high school that we've been together since. So,
Well, on that, when you talk about that, they made you feel whole again. You talked about your parents, and you said that you believe that they loved you in the beginning,
Sure.
or early on. But when you talk about that, in that same note, when I go through all the stuff that you sent me and all the research I've done on you, you don't really talk to them.
Yeah, that's one of my greatest failures today. I really do think. Um, so my dad was kind of, so he went to prison. He got back out. He looked us up through his sister. And he ended up coming to find us. And we began, kind of every now and then, like spending a summer down there, or he would come up to South Carolina for Christmas, but he never tried to, take us back under his wing or anything. And as any, young man would, there was a real rough patch for us where, Mama J, here's Mama J, woman, next door neighbor, not having a husband or anything in the house. And I'm trying to figure out how to be a man. She's trying to help me. So I resented him a lot for that as a teenager, for sure. And I was in Florida 2 weeks ago on vacation, went to Tampa, saw him all week. So we don't talk much, but there's love there. There's a connection there. And, I wouldn't visit Tampa, Florida and like avoid seeing him for sure. But, we're not the closest of close just because, I end up, knowing him from a distance. And there were some disappointments there and things that he missed out on, things I wish he was there. And he's been very apologetic over my lifetime. And I've pretty much told him he doesn't need to apologize to me. If he can be a good granddad, that's all he needs to do. Now, with my birth mother, I didn't find her again, or they didn't find me actually until I was about 29 years old. And we went from like no talking at all, 3 or 4 years old, quarter century, then I'm found again. And we found each other through MySpace of all things back then. Someone was like, hey, this guy's got a unique name. Let's just look him up. And I was found. And so we've been around each other for about a decade now, a little bit over a decade. She spent Thanksgiving here in my house a year ago. So again, we've reestablished relationships. She knows her grandchildren. But it's just not one of those, there's kind of a 25-year gap that is hard to account for. And I know as I get older now, that's probably one of my biggest failures is it's at this point, it's kind of not on them to kind of do the work to make the relationship work this way. It's probably more on me to go that way with it. But, I have my own kids and have my own wife, and those have become big priorities for me. And it's hard to kind of make amends for those 25 years on my end when I'm trying to invest in the new generation that's coming up in my own household, if that makes sense.
It does, but it kind of makes a kind of a strange paradox with that, because I think in all of us, and I have 3 daughters, I think that we always don't teach our kids what we need to do. Does that make sense? We tell them, love your family, hang out with them, and we may argue with family or not talk to family, and we don't provide the best example for it. So how do we overcome something like that? Because especially with you, if anybody has a reason not to talk, it's a 25-year absence. There's got to be a lot of heartburn there. There's got to be a lot of unanswered questions there. And yeah. I would think that you have to be at a point where you don't even really want to know the answers anymore. Or do you?
In a lot of ways, I don't know. That's a great question. And then there's here's the interesting piece. Like, where does that leave Mama J? right? Like if I try to re-engage and make myself closer to my birth mother or make myself closer to my birth father, well, there was one person that surely was there, rain, sleet, snow, hail, the bad, the good, all of it, and she was not even, any type of relation to us, just a next door neighbor. So there's always been this piece with me that's like, well, if I try to get closer to them, like, what does that mean for my relationship with Mama J? Is that some way disrespecting her? Is it some way like not valuing her contribution to who I am? Is it, there's all those kind of questions to deal with. So what I've tried to do over time is be as close to them as it makes me comfortable, and be close enough to know my history and know my past well beyond them, because I think that's important for every family. But also be as inviting as I could for them to have an invested and fruitful relationship with their grandkids, because I don't want the gap that I had in my life to then create a gap in their lives. So my oldest kid is creeping up on 12, and she knows a lot of this history because she's finally come to age where we can talk about this stuff. But, she doesn't know all of the pain and the struggle and stuff. And I don't, you don't want to put that on your kids, right? So what she does know is that, Nana's an artist. That's what she calls my mom, my birth mother. Nana's an artist and can paint anything. And she's a sweet and kind lady who means well. What she does know about her grandpa Steve, who's my birth father, is that he is creative and an innovator and corny and likes to be around when he can. And I don't want to take that from them, right? So that's how I think that's how I interact with them, to make sure they have that opportunity with the youngins.
So let's talk a little bit about the nature versus nurture
Yeah.
of growing up in that environment. Now, let's say of all your closest friends, your brother that grew up with you, what happened to the majority of them? Because we're going to get into you kind of going off to prep school and getting accepted into West Point, because that's a pretty interesting story. But what happens to all the people around you?
Oh man, today there's some people in the neighborhood that aren't alive anymore. There's some people that didn't graduate high school. There's some people that went off to college, didn't finish. There's some people who tried to play basketball and sports like that, and it went nowhere. There's some people back then that are, doing time in prison, because that was just the nature of the environment that I grew up in. There's never a time, because my mom still lives in that neighborhood, there's never a time I go back and literally see any of the same people that I played basketball with in the street, because they just don't exist in my neighborhood anymore.
Well, let me ask you, growing up real quick, and it kind of goes into this, with you having a mixed background, did you have trouble in that neighborhood? Or were you ever looked at differently? Or did you ever have to prove yourself or anything like that?
I think a lot of it was around the normal stuff that was said back then. Like, I got called a zebra and an Oreo and all of that kind of stuff. But because, I could play a little bit of basketball, and, I could run a little bit faster than some, and I could, catch a football. Me and my brother and I we were accepted in a way. We said a lot of stuff back in the 80s that should not have been said against each other. And it was I think a different environment, right? We could joke with each other, and we ribbed each other. And today, some of the ribbing that we did probably would be called bullying. But all in all, when I started to go to different schools, I stopped spending so much time with the people in my neighborhood. So, when I was going across town to a different school, and I was the new kid, you got to get through the new kid stuff. But eventually, I was very accepted. And in high school, I did okay, and I cared about my high school a lot, and I cared about my high school experience because Mama J beat it in my head that I would, and that I had to do well so I could get out of there. So by high school, everything was kind of normal. And it helped that I also, met this young girl there that would eventually be my wife.
When is it in high school that you're actually chosen and accepted to go into West Point? Because it's not your senior year, it's your junior year, right?
So you apply when you're a junior, and that still is today, because it's like a very early application process. And if you are accepted, in that first semester, most likely of your senior year, because most academies, when you look across Air Force and all of them, they're trying to poach that talent early before they're going to these, other awesome schools. So I was accepted to West Point December of my senior year in high school, but then I did not go directly, and I went to prep school instead, because while I'd worked hard and thought I was ready, when the acceptance letter actually came, I was pretty intimidated by it. No one at my high school had gone before, so I didn't have somebody to reach out to and say, like, what is this process like? There's nobody in my family that had been in the military, so there was no one I could reach out and say, like, what is it like being in the Army? I was, just in JROTC, and wearing a pickle green suit and all that good stuff. So I was a little intimidated, so I ended up not going straight in, and I went to the prep school first. But I found out pretty early. But I had been tracking West Point since I was a freshman in high school, for sure.
So it's interesting that you get accepted, but you go to this prep school because it's supposed to get you ready for West Point. It's supposed to get kind of those butterflies out of your stomach.
Mm-hmm.
But then you go to West Point, in your first year, you have a 1.9 grade point average.
Yeah, man. Got a solid, hard.
So what happened?
I got punched in the face by West Point academics, man. Like I had a professor, a civilian professor. There's a lot of academy teachers that are military. I had a civilian, and this guy was, he was very specific about how the class would be run and how you would be prepared, and I just wasn't ready for it. And I got a D in that class. Only D I've ever got in my entire life. Got my first semester at West Point, and it brought my GPA down to a 1.9. And it was a shocking slap in the face.
Humbling?
Say again?
Was it humbling, or was it a shock?
Oh, no, it was a bit of both.
Okay.
For sure. Anybody that's at West Point is, they're telling you stuff like, you're the best of the best and all that, and you were hand selected and all that good stuff. So you feel pretty confident. And I think, from my background and my past, I thought, I came a long way, and I thought I was, going to be okay and good to go. But then, I get that humble pie of, well, you're not good to go yet. You need to buckle down. And at the time, I wasn't like asking for extra help from my teachers or leaning on peers or anything like that, because, Mama J had taught me how to kind of take care of myself. And I really needed to humble myself to ask for help. And I did. And I did better afterward. But it was also shocking because, I had never got a D before. I never got a C before I attended the academy. I just didn't know what that feeling was like. And then you're around so many awesome people who are doing awesome things, and all these cadets are doing well around me. And here I'm getting, D's and C's at times there in that first semester. And it was a shock to the system for sure. But then it told me that I needed to get my stuff together. And I tried to after that.
What'd Mama J say?
Mama J was like, "You better not fail out of that school," because she knew it was a big deal for our family, and it was at the time I'm sure it's the price of West Point education today is much bigger, but at the time this was like $250,000 education that I was getting for free, and it was the best school I had got into. And she was just like, hey, don't mess it up. But she also, like she has always done, believed in me. Whenever I messed up, whenever I had scrapes, whenever I really jacked life up, she was always there to give me that kind of look that all Southern women have, that they don't have to say anything, but they kind of just give you that look, and you kind of know, okay, it's time for me to straighten up and fly right. But she always believed in me. She always, she just said, hey, take a step back, get your stuff together. You better ask for some help up there. And I did.
And everything worked out. So there's one more time that I would say that stood out that you got in trouble at West Point. You were a boxer there.
Mm-hmm.
Got in a little bit of trouble with a drinking incident.
Yeah.
So you've been humbled by the grades. Now they tell you you're not going to do, because the way I look at it is like the military. You're not going to do what you want to do. You're going to do what we want you to do. I mean, that's the only way I can describe it. You're going to do what they're paying for your school. You're going to do exactly what they tell you to do.
Yeah.
So you get in trouble with this. You get kicked off the boxing team for a little while.
Yeah.
Are you worried at any point, like, shit, I cannot mess this up? And in something, not necessarily a grade, but in something where I'm in trouble, do you ever start going, oh, shit?
In that particular instance, that was just, silly, young.
Absolutely.
There's so many, the academy can be such a pressure cooker. So when you do travel, when you do get away, if be it on a team or off of a team, if you're just getting away from the academy, you kind of want to let loose. And it's one of those times when I let loose a little bit too much, and embarrass myself, embarrass my team in the process. And again, it was one of those times where I remember this like it was yesterday. Coach was extremely disappointed in me. He wasn't angry. He didn't want to like rip my head off, which I thought was going to happen. He was just like, let this be a lesson for you when you go lead troops. Like, there's going to be a time when they're going to really disappoint you, and you're going to have to figure out what you're going to do to either rebuild that troop, that soldier, that situation, or, kick him to the curb. And he was like, your penance is you're off the team. And I was like, roger that. And then after some time, after a long time, they let me come back around. And it was a huge lesson for me about redemption and about mistakes and about, seeing beyond, the error that was taught to me by my coaches at that moment. Like really like looking and saying like, I assume he was looking at me and saying, this is a good kid. He just did something stupid. His grades are in order. He's a leader within the Corps of Cadets at this time. This is just an uncharacteristic incident. And he really let me know in no uncertain terms that I would come across a soldier like that when I was out in the force. And I mean, anybody who has served has come across.
I'm sure you came across multiple ones.
Yeah, especially growing up in the 82nd. Yeah, it was a good lesson for me to learn on my own that I could be redeemed and I wasn't just a piece of trash to be flicked to the curb just because I made a big mistake. It was a good lesson to learn there, as opposed to learning that lesson as a lieutenant or a captain even,
A problem that we have today a lot is short-sighted leaders. And you just talked about that. We look at knee-jerk reactions, and it happens everywhere. It happens in the military, happens in law enforcement, happens in medical.
Yeah.
All of those pressure cooker jobs. we get knee-jerk reactions. And we seem to anymore be going further and further down that road where the knee-jerk reactions are getting bigger, the short-sightedness is growing stronger. Is there a way that we pull away from that and go back to, because everyone can't get kicked off the boxing team? And sometimes these higher commands, it's too late to learn it. So how do we change that from the bottom up or from the middle up, or how do we do that when we're with leaders that have, one, never been humbled like that, never been taught like that, and quite frankly, some that don't ever want to learn to be like that?
That's very interesting. I'm gonna take it from being a subordinate to the, thinking about higher leaders. So this is a piece of advice I've shared before that I was taught that was really good for me to learn at a much younger officer age. I think subordinates got to give leaders who don't have this stuff all together some grace. So I'm gonna talk from an Army perspective specifically. Your battalion commander, lieutenant colonel, that battalion commander, the first time they command a battalion is as a lieutenant colonel. Like, they don't get you don't get multiple runs at battalion command, even though you might be at 17, 18, 19 years of service, right? Same thing with a brigade commander at the 06 level. First time they command a brigade, when they're in 06. Division commander, how many divisions do you command? One, right? 2-star general, the first time they're commanding is at that 2-star level. Global geographic command, 4-star, CENTCOM, the PACOMs, all that stuff. There are 4 stars. They got 30-something years of service. They do not get to command multiple GCCs. They do that one time. It's their first time. So I remind people to give these commanders, give these leaders grace, because it's their first time doing it, no matter how many years of service they have. So as they're trying to figure it out, it's our job and our responsibility to I think, take care of ourselves, but then help them figure out that first time job that they're doing, battalion command, brigade command, or beyond. Now, from the leader perspective, the ones who, to get after what you're talking about, haven't been humbled, or, are so draconian, or forget their mistakes, right? They were taken care of, but now that they're in the seat, it's like, they're crushing Joe and Josephine down there on the line.
And to interrupt you just real quick, I think that's the one right there that you're talking about that bites us in the ass the most. I think it's those guys that have forgot their past or forgot their misgivings or whatever you want to call it. And when they take over, they think, I got to set an example. This is how it'll go.
Yeah, that's a tough one. That's a real tough one, because it takes a lot of self-awareness to even remember your past mistakes, or to remember that this is your first time doing it. I think there's a couple different ways we approach that. There are systems being put in place, especially in the Army. Like, I came through a system to get selected for battalion command, the battalion commander's assessment program that is new, that your peers and your subordinates provide feedback, and it can keep you from battalion command today. This is brand new as of, last year or so. So I think the Army has taken care of some systems that put them into place that make you reflective as a leader, or you won't get the chance. So that's a good. I think the second thing there is, I think it's really incumbent upon, just talking from the officer side, really good NCOs, really good first sergeants, really good sergeant majors, really good platoon sergeants, all those in betweens too, to when they see their leader kind of being a little bit maybe harsh, maybe a little bit too firm, maybe forgetting who they used to be, because the Army is small, so sometimes we work with NCOs that we've worked with before. I think it takes a really strong secondhand man or woman to come up to that leader and say, hey, sir, hey, ma'am, don't you remember being a lieutenant? Don't you remember being a youngin'? Hey, let's sit down and talk about, I don't even know about your mistakes. Can we talk about some of the things that you might have struggled with? And let's think about that the next time we're doing some disciplinary action, or Let's bring that up and maybe point that perspective out next time we're thinking about that lieutenant who's made a mistake. I think it takes some leaders around the level of the leader to really take care of them too, not just from a subordinate level. And then the last thing is we got to stop hero worshiping, man. Like we got to, and this might be a controversial thing for some folks out there. We got to stop thinking that you have to have a position to be successful. Like you can be a good leader and not be a commander, right? You can be a good officer and be a staff officer and just do good work. I think positions like these command positions over time, you feel like it's got to be zero defect. You feel like, well, I can't show any vulnerability, or I can't show where my failures were, or I got to come down on these folks because it's going to hurt my stats. I think we got to figure out a way to stop hero worshiping positions so much and give people opportunities to grow in other ways.
But isn't that kind of counterintuitive to what the military is? Isn't the point of the military to learn leadership and to gain those leadership positions in order to teach the younger generation to come up into those positions? So isn't that kind of counterintuitive to when you say don't hero worship? I get that point, but isn't that kind of the whole thing, is to get to those ranks and to get to those positions?
Well, I think in the just speaking from an Army perspective, again, I'm speaking my own opinions.
Right.
I'm not speaking for the Army. I think one of the purposes of our military is to defend the nation, right? In the grand scheme of things. So yeah, beneath defending the nation is a subset of control and hierarchy that allows us to maneuver folks so we can defend our nation, which requires leadership, because leadership then provides, purpose, key tasks, end state, inspiration, motivation for folks to go do the nation's bidding. But at the same time, if we're going to promulgate war or we're going to defend our shores, I think it can't be all about the positions. It can be about leadership. Leadership isn't just a positional thing. I think leadership is a 360 thing. There's been, for example, when I was last in command as a company commander, I got rid of the terminology, or I always poo-pooed on the terminology junior enlisted. To me, it was like a curse word in my formation. I didn't like to hear junior enlisted. I like to call them all junior leaders, because the minute you show up from AIT or whatever initial training you do, you're in a formation, somebody's coming behind you. So let's treat them like leaders from day one. From an Army perspective as well, you can do lateral transfers at E4 from specialist to corporal. And I did my darndest to make every specialist a corporal because I just wanted more NCOs in my formation. And I wanted to reward people who were stepping up even if they didn't have the position of a leader, right? So leadership, I think, is really beyond something positional. And if you look at some different leadership theories out there, it'll talk about positional leadership versus referent leadership versus transformational leadership. And I don't think you have to have a position for that. As a matter of fact, one of the reasons I figure that stuff out in my organization is because when I showed up, I handed out 3x5 cards to random people who was walking past me that I didn't know in the hallway, didn't care what rank they were. And I told them on this card, I want you to write down every person that's a leader in this organization, regardless of position. I don't care what rank they are, what position are. If you believe you would follow them into a burning building or go into war with them, or if they ask you to do something you want to crush in their judgment, I want you to write their name down on here. As many as you want, give back to me. And then I collected those stats, and I'll tell you, there were some people who were in formal leadership positions on those lists. And there were some people who weren't. The people who weren't, I made sure I leveraged. That's what I think partly of what leadership is.
Do you think that could cause a problem to be more of a popularity contest? Did you ever see that you would see people's names on there? You would see people that were mentioned, that it was more of a, hey, that's a good guy, I hang out with him, I do things like that? Or did you really see the majority of the time true leaders come from that?
I saw true leaders. There was a young E5 in the headquarters office. This time, I know the plural of anecdote is not fact, but I got two anecdotes I have to share with you.
Okay.
E5 front office admin clerk. Single mom. A phenomenal office clerk, a phenomenal person to work in the headquarters, knocking out everything, paperwork always tight, getting stuff from higher headquarters, no issues. But always never forgot she was an E5. Like, looked like an NCO, walked like an NCO, talked like an NCO, squared people away, regardless, because, she didn't have a formalized position, okay? That was one of the people whose name was on that list. And when I started asking about this person, they were like, oh yeah, Sergeant so-and-so, real squared away. I was like, what is she doing up in the headquarters then? Long story short, that person today is a lieutenant who's accepted to an Army nursing program that is going to medical school to be an Army nurse. Going to be a captain when she finishes. So the leadership was there, and we put her in positions for her to affect the Army in a different way. She was just an admin clerk, but she, from one of those lists, made it, people made it known that she was a leader, and we fostered her abilities, we fostered her creativity, we fostered her leadership capability in other ways. She, went off to green to gold, went to college, been a lieutenant for a couple of years. Now she has this wonderful opportunity. There was another one, young E4. Everyone listened to this guy. And I thought he was just one of those guys you're talking about, like just a good dude in the barracks. But we had a couple informal kind of settings with him, with a couple different leaders. And I would always invite this young specialist in. And he had some vision. And I would always ask him, I'm like, hey man, have you ever thought about, what are you going to do with your life? Are you going to be an officer? Are you going to get out? He's like, oh no, I'm not going to stand. Like, this isn't for me. I want to grow a family and everything. I was like, okay. He was like, yeah, but I heard you talking about making people corporals. I would love to be a corporal because I want to test the waters on this NCO stuff. He's the first person we made a corporal, and he was getting out. So our sergeant major for the battalion was like, we're not making this guy a corporal, an NCO. He's going to get out. And I was like, do you know his name? Like, yeah, I know Mr. So-and-so. Like, okay, if you know him as a sergeant major of the battalion and he's a young E4, what does that tell you? What do you know about him? He started talking about all this good stuff he was doing. And I was like, well, that's why I want to make this guy a leader before he gets out. Let's take advantage of his potential and let him lead a troop or two. And he did. And that kid crushed it. Everybody respected him. He helped me write the vision statement for the company. And everyone was tearful when that guy was getting out of the Army, to include himself. He had other aspirations, but that kid was a super good kid, and he just needed the opportunity. And, from one of these little informal lists, we got to let him take advantage of the opportunity of leadership.
With saying that and him getting out and everyone being sad about it, how do you keep guys like him in the military? Because they're few and far between now. It's hard to keep the best of the best because they do have aspirations.
So I think it's okay if people exit with grace. I think, we need leaders across society. I think it's one of the things that, holds us all together as leadership, especially in America. So I'm okay with good folk getting out and doing something else, because if they're good, they're still going to be good wherever they go.
Absolutely.
Now, to drill down to your point about like how, it would be good for us to keep some of those folks in. How do we do that? I think we need to think a little bit more at the bigger kind of, beyond myself, bigger scheme of things of really giving these folks opportunities, really doing what's best for them and their families. And sometimes, we have put other priorities in front of all of that and have, held people back from schools or whatever it may be, and have not like kind of let them carve their own path. Sometimes you got to let people, go into a functional area, go do some specialty school or go do something else, even though you don't want them to do that stuff, just to keep them in, just to retain them. Luckily, the Army just transitioned over to doing something called people first. So we are like really enforcing this idea of putting people first and letting them be the priority truly over sometimes over maybe even a mission requirement if we can be people and cover down on things. So I think that's part of it, is really understanding our people, knowing where they are. I will tell you that even that person that's going to that nursing program, there might have been a time when she thought she wanted to get out. But then when I asked, when others leaders I asked, like, what would keep you in? A green to gold packet. Some people would say, well, we need really good NCO leadership, and she could have been a sergeant major all day. But then you hear her and you know that she's a single parent, and you know the potential for income might just happen to be a little bit better on the officer side. And that's also what she wants to do. You get her to stay by letting her do that, as opposed to trying to make her the next best E7. I mean, this was the NCO that was winning NCO of the year for our higher headquarters. This was the NCO who, in my company, we gave out a memorial award for a fallen E7 we had. She was the inaugural winner of that award. Best, and it didn't go to the best NCO in the organization. It went to the best leader in my organization. First person to get it was her. So some people were like, hey, let's groom her to be the next sergeant major of the Army, first female sergeant major of the Army. Can we do that? Well, that's not what she wanted to do. And it kept her in because we let her do what she wanted to do. And now she's going to be, really great in the career field that she's chosen.
Do you think there's any problem with when you mention people first, and you say that even, and if we get into an area, because I know you're still active and I know you don't want to talk about some of these things. So, but I want to get at this because I think it's on a lot of people's minds. If you look in the past 20 years, we've been at war,
Sure,
all over globally. I mean, you have like 12 deployments yourself, I think. So you know that we've been at war. When you hear people say we take people over mission sometimes, does that concern you at all?
That's a really tough question to answer. As I think about it a little bit, I think about it from this perspective. If you're in the Army, let's take it from a different perspective.
Okay.
If you're in the Air Force, you fight planes, okay? Your means of fighting is a plane.
Okay.
In the aggregate.
Okay.
If you're in the Navy, you fight ships. If you're in our armed forces and in the Army, you fight with people. People are the implementation tool. Yeah, Army folks got tanks and howitzers and guns and stuff. But in the grand scheme of things, the Army is a people force. If you are going to put men and women on target, put men and women in harm's way, they have to be first to even accomplish the mission, right? Let's unpack this from a lot of different ways.
Okay.
When you think about instances of post-traumatic stress, for example, that's been situations where we put mission and mission and mission and mission and mission first, pause for the person, and then mission and mission and mission and mission, and then pause enough for the person, especially on the back end. I will tell you that things like trust, mutual trust and respect between folks who are going in harm's way doesn't just end when you're, executing on the target. It continues when you get back off and are sitting beside each other on a dusty, stormy bunk, and you gotta, unpack what y'all just went through. That trust continues, that people piece continues. So I would say, you know, even if you say people first, mission always, or people always and mission always, they always got to be closely knit. But man, the people are doing the do. And I will say, over time, and I haven't gotten it all right for sure, but I've done my utmost level best to be as connected to people when I serve with them, regardless of the conditions, garrison, overseas, or whatever, to really get to know who they are, and practice tailor-made leadership for what they need right now, that person, this time, this context, given these circumstances, given these needs, given these mission parameters. You know, practicing something called the specificity principle, which is grounded in theory, actually from psychology, is by a guy named Bornstein. So I think that you can never, ever, ever, especially from an Army perspective, because we're fighting we're using people as an implementation tool. I think you can never deprioritize humans.
So let me come at the question at a different angle then.
Okay.
Do you feel that there can be, with that, a bastardization of that philosophy? Because of course, people first. You're exactly right. Post-traumatic stress. And we're not just talking in the military. We're talking in law enforcement. We're talking all of those different things. Fire, anyone that's a first responder. We can take it at that text.
Absolutely.
I think the question that we come at from another angle, though, is can we get to a point, because we see it now, can we get to a point where we're so concerned with each individual thought that we lose focus on that mission? And you spoke about specificity. So I wonder, though, is there a point that we can get to where maybe not by our own means or not because of our own falters, but where we lose sight of that mission?
I think if we have good leaders can balance investing in individuals and not losing sight of the mission. I think the great leaders can always practice discernment enough where they can make good calls that will still get the mission done and take care of their folks. I think where the bastardization might happen, or where the slips happen, where they put, people so far forward that they're not caring so much about the mission, and the mission fails, is in essence simply bad leadership, or lazy leadership, or convenient leadership, or likership, because I know a lot of times people like to call it likership. I think if you're a damn good leader or a great leader, you can balance the two. You can think about your people and put them in the context of whatever the mission may be, still get the mission done, and still take care of your people. I think the greatest leaders have done so, which is why we have great leaders still in the Army, because they were able to, bring people up in the ranks. The Army has never hurt for leadership. The military in general, I don't think, has ever hurt for leadership. We always have great leaders that get us through the next hump, whatever that hump may be. And I think it's because they have figured out the way to get the job done, get the mission accomplished, but still take care of the folks that are supporting them, so they can grow up and do that same thing, right? Be great leaders, take care of the next generation.
Let's look at it from a psychology point of view.
Okay.
Percentages. Percentage, we'll use 0 to 100. Percentage of great leaders, good leaders, should not be leaders.
I don't know. I don't know if I can answer that. I don't know if if I could know,
Well, let's use
what's
your
actually out
personal
there.
experience. Let's use your career from West Point all the way up until now. Of all the leaders you've had, we'll use 0 to 100 again. Great, good, probably should have chosen something else. And I know you've had all three. Everybody has.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's been an even split between the three. I've had some of each. In the grand scheme of things, the good ones have balanced what the not so great and the ones who probably be doing something else were doing. I think the bad ones also showed me how great the good ones were, right? I think you need the context, right? Like when I think of Ashley and I say this all the time, when we think of what our marriage is and what love is, one of the reasons we're together for so long is because we help each other feel the entire spectrum of what love is, right? Feel the entire spectrum of what emotion and life is. There's sometimes we do our best and we're in such a good place. Then there's sometimes we just don't like each other. Sometimes we piss each other off. But in the aggregate, it shows us, it gives us expanse. It helps us understand each other and understand this whole human existence thing. I think the same can be said about leaders in a lot of ways, whether they're good, bad, or they're indifferent. You want to experience it all. This might sound counterfactual, but I don't think anyone wants to grow up in any service not ever seeing a bad leader, because then you just don't know what it looks like. You don't know what its effects can be. You're just guesstimating at what a bad leader or a bad culture or a bad climate might look like. So bad leaders show us context, show us what wrong looks like. And there's stuff you can tuck away in your rucksack or in your pockets and carry with you that they did. There's one particular leader that wasn't the best for me, but there were, even with that person, they still had kind of little jewels that they gave me that I can still refer to. And in the other context too, there are great leaders, there are good leaders out there that have little kind of, not so great things about them that we may overlook. But I think you need to have a good spectrum of all. And I think I've had a balance of each for sure.
In saying that, and I think I know where you were headed with that, where the leader wasn't necessarily your cup of tea, I guess you could say. In all the stuff that you sent me in 2011, I think, I don't know if that's the right year, but you had trouble with a commander and a team leadership position. Mm-hmm. First off, would you consider that, because I've read everything behind it, would you consider that a bad leader? Well,
I think both of us were bad leaders. That's okay. In hindsight, as I've looked at it. At the time, I thought I was, a hot shot and all that stuff, and I just thought that gentleman, my commander, was a bad leader.
Okay.
I come to find out many, many moons later, after some reflection, after other good leaders, after other good peers helped me unpack that situation, that I was also too a bad leader at the time. Because if I was so good, why wasn't I actually leading up? Why wasn't I, helping this quote unquote bad leader by being a good dude, by being what I needed to be at the time for him, by doing all the extra stuff that, you should do, like, trying to understand his perspective or see his perspective or any of that stuff. I just didn't do that. So I think both of us at the time were bad, especially for each other, for sure.
Is that what you take away from it? Or is there something else that you learned from that situation?
Oh, I for sure learned that I I read this great book after that, John Maxwell's 360-degree leadership, or 360-degree leader. And it talked about leading up. And that situation as a team leader for me, thinking about that company commander, I'm like, oh my goodness, if I had this leading up stuff, the couple chapters that John Maxwell had wrote back then, I'd have been in such a better space. And not only would I may have helped that company commander, I would have helped potentially our organization, because I just didn't. I was so worried about my team. That's a surefire thing to think about, that differentiates a good leader from a bad leader. When you're thinking like my guys, my team, you've lost. And that's how I was thinking as a youngin'. And at the time, I could have been so much better. And that's a major takeaway from that situation for me, is that I could have led up better. I could have been a better leader myself. That was his team, our team, and not so much my team. So that was a big takeaway for me back then.
It's interesting that you say that you were kind of cocky and kind of thought you were the man back then, and that's the trouble that you had with this. But in talking to you, you think that that's one of your greatest faults. Do you still struggle with it?
It is, man, it is my cancer. Something I've, fought my whole life is this idea of, trying to be humble, but having, moments of success, that it's, when everybody's kind of throwing the accolades on you and you feel really good about what you're doing, it's hard to, keep that kind of feeling in the back, like I've made it and I have done well. It's hard to keep that thing at bay. And I mean, I'm just going to be pretty frank about it. When you come from the background that I came from, and you have those trials and tribulations, and you come from the culture that I came from in the 80s too, you had to stand up for yourself. You had to be cocky on the street, or you weren't respected. That's just the context I grew up in. And it's hard to grow up in that type of context and lose some of that. So it always is kind of creeping on the back of my neck. It's like a thing that I always have to keep in check. And I've been blessed over time, right? Like, I've had some good wins over the years, and I'm glad to be where I am. I'm super proud of my family and where we are and where we come from. But I gotta watch it at all times. And that's just me trying to be as self-aware as possible.
Greatest fault?
Yeah, it's probably that. It's probably that. Always trying to balance it all out and making sure I do my best to give credit where credit's due. Try to make sure people understand how much I care about them and how much they have, poured into me. And doing the level best that I can to, make the organization better, and pushing things forward that are, those young leaders, putting them in positions where they could, they can grow, they can do things great, they can make the organization better, they can take the credit. Yeah.
Is there ever a time where that fault or your struggle is a good thing?
I think it always is a good thing. Not mine in particular, but the struggle and challenge and failure in general, I think has always helped. I mean, it's why I created a failure resume, to show that vulnerability, to show again, we've talked about a lot of things tonight. show where I've erred, but it's made me, I've learned something from it. It's made me potentially a better leader. It's given me something in my rucksack to give somebody else. I think success does nothing more than set you up for failure in a lot of ways. We don't learn a lot, I think, from success. And I've said this before on a different podcast, I think. What success, you always saw yourself graduating from that school, doing that cool thing, getting that job, getting the promotion, getting the award. You've always seen yourself doing that. And when you do attain it, you don't kind of sit back and reflect, well, how did I get this done? But man, let you misstep, let you not make it through a course, let you not do a school, let you not be hired. Then you get into the business of trying to figure out how you misstep. So we really, really analyze failure on the back end. I think it teaches you a lot. So I got to be glad for my weaknesses, and I have to be glad for my failures and those things that are not my strengths yet, because they're teaching me so much. I think they're keeping me sharp. They should keep us all sharp as we reflect upon them.
Do you think you look at it in this perspective because of your psychology background? Or do you think that actually hinders you because you're going to overthink it?
That's a good one, DJ. I think part of it is, the background that I have, that I've been privy to get, and all the education around it. But I also think it's, from having great people like my wife who helped me understand the perspective of what those failures and chips on my shoulder and, faults look like in a different context. I've also had great leaders who've kind of helped me reflect and see those things in a new light, and a new shade, and a new perspective after some time. I also think I've had great people like Mama J who believed in me even when I was making the mistakes or when I was not doing the best I could, that saw something else in me, saw a diamond in the rough or what have you, that, have also passed along that perspective to me. All right. My mom, Mama J, ain't had an easy life. So she's always been able to look at it from kind of that other lens, not necessarily being optimistic versus pessimistic, or the glass is half empty or half full, as much as, well, the glass is actually full. Even if it's half water, it's got half air in it. So it's actually full. Just having a different kind of look and view on it that's been kind of imbued upon me by the people in my life.
There's two things about you, and everything I've read and the research, all that kind of stuff. There's two dichotomies of you, and I want to talk about those, and then I want to take the conversation in a different direction. The first off is you're a leader. You've shown that in the military academy. But there's been points along the way where you have trouble with leadership, where you don't necessarily still trust that leadership, or you may have a better way. And it's always interesting to me to see that you're on the battalion command level now. And when you have those things in the past, how do you look at people that may look at you in the same way? That's the first question.
Help me unpack that a little bit.
Okay.
Can you run that?
So you've always been a leader. You've always strived to be a leader. You went to the military academy, all those different kinds of things. But along the way, and we can say probably at each step of the way, you've had trouble with some kind of leader or a command or a directive or something like that, right? It doesn't happen frequently. I'm just saying at each step along the way, as we go through being a young officer, being a field grade officer, being in the schooling and the different leadership roles that you've been in. Now you're at the battalion command level. There's not a lot of people for you to bump heads with. You're getting up there where there's not a lot of people for you to look differently. You come across younger you, as a battalion commander. How do you handle that now? Because you know how you have to handle something, but you know how you did it younger. Is that unpack it enough?
Yeah. Wow, man. you're actually helping me so much think about what I got to do going forward, um, to get ready to try to lead once again. Well, I think I've been fortunate enough that I haven't bumped heads with a leader in a long time. So that gives me some perspective of getting the distance and growing from kind of those initial, failures, and figuring out different ways to work with the people around me. For sure, up, down, left, and right. I think those earlier missteps have really prepared me, I think, for dealing with my younger, crappier self and trying to understand what that person is. I mean, there's a lot of my past that I let be dragged forward, even though I had a great person like Mama J in my life. There is a lot of things that I dealt with that pulled all the way through, West Point and even my early lieutenant years. A reminder that, I didn't find my birth mother again until I was 29. I was a captain in the Army that, I hadn't dealt with yet. So I think what I've learned from some of that and how it would deal with the younger version of me if they happen to be in our formation as I get the chance to lead it, would be to see if there's anything else there when I'm talking to that younger leader. I don't want to clone me. Like cloning is bad in Star Wars, so cloning is bad in
I think
leadership
that's
too.
debatable, but that can be another podcast.
Yeah, yeah. But I'm not interested in building up another version of myself. But I do think the best leaders who dealt with me when I was that younger, crappy officer and leader, the best leaders tried to figure out what was going on with me and gave me that chance. So learning from that, knowing what I went through, I will do my utmost best to get to know them at their level and then help them get to where they want to be with their service.
So here's the second dichotomy, and this is where we change course in this conversation.
Okay.
We can both agree you didn't grow up with a mentor. Of course, you had Mama J, but we're going to say that's apparent. You didn't have shit for mentors. Other than, I will digress on that and say you had a elementary school teacher that kind of set you down, gave you the 5-year plan, told you kind of in a friendly way, you better get your shit together because life's going to come at you fast.
Yeah.
But not a lot of mentoring. You can agree on that, right?
I agree.
So that's what you've dedicated your life to. Not only the military, but mentoring people. So is it because you thought it was so important? Is it because you're angry that no one mentored you? What is the reason? Because that's the second dichotomy that I see here. You don't come from any of that, but that's what you want your lasting legacy to be.
Yeah, the mentoring thing, specifically with regard to the nonprofit that I get to run, is I co-founded it with a mentee. So a lot of that's one piece of the story is this gentleman came to me, we've been connected, and we wanted to fix what we thought was an almost unfixable problem, and then we come up with this entity. The other piece there is when I was growing up, I didn't have a lot of mentorship, and that there was a gap. And on the back end now that I do have good mentors, and that I have been able to be a mentor for others, I've seen the richness, the connectiveness, the growth that can happen, not only with that protege, but with myself, because it's a reciprocal relationship, right? That I just want to be able to attempt to give that gift to as many people as possible, which is, why we created this other platform. It's one, to just be in a formation or an organization where you're doing your best to help the formation as it is in front of you and help make your leaders better, make your peers better. But then there's another to have this, a whole other entity where you can tap into different resources and tap into other leadership and tap into other venues and ventures. And you can really, really, really connect and then potentially exponentially help so many others. So I think I have a purpose, and I think my purpose statement is I'm purpose built to serve others, and I think mentoring is the best venue or best way for me to do that for others.
First off, what is the unfixable problem?
So I mentioned it being, mentorship for so long has been this kind of secondary thing that we got to do. We're responsible for teach, coach, mentoring others, right? Like, and it's like squash those three words together, like they're the same word, like a verbal triplet. That person needs some teach, coach, mentorship. But we don't like, there's, we don't really assess it. We don't teach it to our leaders. There's no block on an evaluation form that says, this person had, 12 mentees over the years, so they're good to go or whatever. So the impossible problem that this challenge that we've been trying to address over the years is, how do we make people better mentors? How do we make better mentees? How do we connect them to each other, but also connect them to the resources they may need to just develop to be better, not only like soldiers and leaders and followers, but better global citizens, better Americans, but better global citizens as well? How can we help imbue people with better empathy, better understanding of diversity, inclusion, and equity, better thoughts about what character looks like in themselves and in others? So that's been the challenge we've been trying to chase down, and you can't fix it overnight for sure.
Is it a fixable problem now?
I think there's always going to be leadership challenges. I think there are always going to be young kids that need to be mentored. There'll always be, adolescents and post-adolescents that need to be mentored. I'll always think that there'll be people my age that need others invested in their lives for them to be better people. So it's not going to be, someday we all wake up and, mentoring will finally be a thing that everyone does. So it's not necessarily a completely fixable thing. But like so many other things with leadership, like so many other things that have to do with investment in others, I do think it's a worthy cause. It's a worthy cause to try to invest in others, try to develop them, and try to give them maybe some perspective by being really involved in their lives, for sure.
How much success have you had with it so far?
With mentoring in general?
Yeah. We'll talk about military mentors in a minute, but with mentoring in general, how do you, when you walk away from, I know there's no, let's use a report card. What do you give yourself?
Oh, I don't know, man. That's a tough question.
I like to ask tough questions. If you can't tell.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. I can see, DJ. I haven't always gotten it right. I'm hoping I'm a B plus or better. I do have, I get great notes from folks. I had a guy call me today at 6 p.m. my time, just as I was sitting down after dinner, and he sounded really fraught, with panic, and he was thinking about, he's got this selection coming up in about 20 days, and he's got all these people around him telling him he shouldn't do it, and it's bad for his career, and think about what you're doing. You're throwing all these opportunities. Like, he was really in a bad spot. And I got a chance to talk to him for about 9 or 11 minutes or so. It was really short. And we unpacked some things together, and he felt really good at the end of the conversation. And we had established a relationship a long time ago, so he could do that. So in moments like that, like I feel like I'm batting pretty good. I could tell you stories about folks that I connected with when they were teenagers that they're now in their mid 30s, that I've seen go to prep school, go to West Point, graduate, come in the Army, go off to combat, come back, get in a selective degree program, and now they're field grade officers. And I feel really good about those relationships. But since it's reciprocal, a lot of that is on them. A lot of that is on them and their own gumption, their own push, their own fire. So hopefully, I've been a good mentor for others as much as I've had now in my kind of older years, good mentorship for myself from others.
When you say it's like gumption and it's back on them, it reminds me of when you were talking about that it's more on you now for your parents.
Yeah.
Same kind of idea.
A little bit, because again, the stuff with my parents, my birth parents,
right.
I mean, they're my blood, right? Little different in that, with these mentees and mentoring relationships, usually there's no blood relation there.
Right.
So I think
I guess what I mean by that is kind of the same idea where you're going to have to work at it along with them. They're going to have to work at it too for this relationship to work. It's a very symbiotic relationship, and it takes both working together to actually make it work. And so when you say that, it sounds like where you're kind of looking back now as an older man and saying, wow, at one point I thought it was just them, but I'm seeing it's both.
Oh yes, for sure. I can see that. Very symbiotic, and it's got to be, a lot of reciprocal work to be done for sure. So I'm still learning, which is great.
At a B+, what can you do better?
I could for sure reach out, check on them a whole lot more. I just started I could be more systematic. This year I started a more systematic process for asking very specific questions to them all across the board, all the ones that I'm connected to. So I could have more data to work with, more understanding there. Because I haven't been so programmatic over time. I've let it be so natural that I haven't at times taken advantage of the theoretical perspectives that I know now. So going into this year, that was something I really wanted to adjust. I wanted to be more connected in a systematic way and think of, intriguing questions that would make them think about today, tomorrow, their future, their family's future, and how they want to invest in themselves. So I can know that stuff as a baseline. And then also, dabble with that a little bit to then find out whether these questions are working or not. So then I could, share not their answers, but the actual questions with other mentor and mentee networks I'm connected to. So for sure, I can be more systematic and more programmatic with the approach I take.
Let's talk a little bit about military mentors. I want you to really promote your organization here and say what good you have done and what good you still have left to do.
So a little bit about us. We've been around since 2015. Co-founded with a mentee of mine and also a gentleman that's a friend. We've known each other for about 2 decades now. The motto is start a conversation, spark a transformation. The mission statement very simply is elevating, educating, and facilitating mentoring for the military and beyond. I can talk to you about those three different concepts, but I'd rather talk to you about the military and beyond in peace, because people think we're just about, working with formations and people who wear the uniform. Now, while we do try to work with the vast majority of folks across the joint forces, and we're connected to all of them, we also try to work with civilians and industry, as long as people have a particular affinity for military style leadership, military style development, or just have an affinity for helping veterans. Like we try to work with colleges who got veterans transitioning to go back to school after their service, right? So some of the things that we've done over time is we've created mentor networks where mentees and mentors can be connected to each other. We've also put on workshops that look at, the art and the science of mentoring. So when I say the art and the science, I'm talking about, we tell good stories about what mentoring can look like. But at the same time, we talk about the theoretical perspectives of, the 40 or 50 years of research behind how mentoring can happen. We've also done some consulting for some civilian companies to help them start mentor programs, to help them, with their veteran retention, to help, because they're veterans. They're asking during exit interviews, hey, why are you guys leaving us? Well, I had mentors in the military. I kind of don't have them here. It's like everybody kind of figure out your cubicle and do your mission, do your stuff. So we've helped them build up programs and given them material, one-off material, so they could help retain those individuals, but then also leverage those people's leadership. Sometimes people exit the service after, commanding troops or being in charge of a large bulk of folks. And then they go into some civilian job and it's like, hey, all you're in charge of is this computer in this cubicle. And your purpose is to knock out these widgets and these TPS reports, to use an Office Space reference there. So we try to help them build up their mentoring programs. What we're going to do in the future is to continue to do that and to lash up. We want to get closer to any organization that looks at the military and says, those guys have some really good leadership capabilities, and we want to grow that in our organization. One, hey, we have veterans in our organization, and it's kind of there's not a true match between us taking advantage and fully growing them to their potential. We would like for them to be a part of our leadership in our organization. We want to retain that talent. We'd love to lash up with you if you want to do that. And we want to get closer to high school JROTCs. We want to get closer to ROTCs at college campuses. And we want to be deeper out there in the nonprofit space. If you want your leaders developed and want to have an organization that can come to you, that can try to inoculate you against bad leadership in your future through mentoring. We think mentoring can be a salve for a lot of an organization's woes.
What's next for you?
For me personally, still growing my family, man. This whole 15-year anniversary on Thursday is looking really happy for us, so we can go out
plans
and have a good time. Oh, we always do. We one of the things that's kept us together so long is things like date night. Things like date night we just went on a date this weekend, but we will do another one this Thursday because it's our anniversary. So yeah, we've been very good over the years of staying closely connected. So we're gonna move in a couple weeks as well. It's time for us to move on from Tufts and do the next thing. So we're looking forward to that. Supporting an awesome organization here coming up. And then, keeping the grow military mentors as much as we can, and working with some special entities out there that, lashing up with some colleges as of late to bring some accreditation to we have a specific developmental program called the Emissaries, which is a 6-month program that we selects about a dozen folks for. We have people apply, people get nominated for it, and keeping to grow that. That's actually our premier program right now, is putting these folks through these 6 months leader development cohort. So starting up the next one of that here shortly at the end of the month is really exciting, because we get such a wide caliber of folks. We get Army, Navy, Air Force, we get enlisted folks, we get civilians who are in higher ed, we get senior officers. This next cohort is going to have a retired 06 in it. So looking forward to building with those folks, because it's so wonderful to develop reciprocally with them as we kind of give them a curriculum to adhere to over time. They also get to do mentoring programs and community service-based projects that are really denting the universe. We've had an emissary create a podcast. We've had an emissary go back to their home island out in the Caribbean and provide projectors and laptops and stuff for those schools. Wow. We've had other people start nonprofits that are looking at scholarship building in their former high schools. We've had people, especially during COVID, aggregate thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds of food and give it out to their local community through church organizations and local sports affiliations and stuff. So, it's one of those things where, we could all like go to a housing project and like all build one project together, and that be our big thing to do as a cohort all together. Or we can flip that paradigm and say, you create something yourself. And now we have, 10, 12 different various projects out there denting the universe. So I'm looking forward to that too.
Well, where can everyone find you?
I have a unique name, Chaveso Cook, Chaveso. If you Google me, that's me. That can be a good and a bad thing, I guess. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Facebook as well. I am on Twitter and Facebook, Twitter and Instagram, but it's more passive. I don't interact much on there. So if you want to find me on LinkedIn or Facebook, I'd appreciate the connection, and I would like to grow with you. We also have militarymentors.org is our site. We also have, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn page for militarymentors.org as well. So you can find us all on there as well.
Man, you got quite a story. That's a lot of school, man. You have done some great things. It's amazing to hear the story. Mama J has to be like super proud. And likewise on your end, of just a woman who didn't have to take you in, that changed your entire world. It's an amazing story. I'm so glad you came on. Guys, if you want more of us, you can find us on YouTube at the DTD Podcast. You can find us on the Facebook group at the DTD Podcast, and you can find me on Twitter at DoubleSpeakDJ. That's going to be it for the show tonight. That's Chevy. I'm DJ. This has been the DTD Podcast. And remember, you come here because the best stories are true. We'll catch you on the next one, guys. We'll see you.